أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Respected brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I welcome you all to our third year of Islamic law, our Fiqh class. Last 2 years we examined the book of purity, the book of salah, the book of fasting, the book of zakat, and we also examined half of the book of Khums. This year we will start by continuing our discussion of the laws surrounding Khums, and then once we finish the book of Khums, we will examine the book of Hajj, inshaAllah. We do have an Arabic book for this course. It is in Arabic. The teaching is going to be in English. So even if you do not read Arabic, you will benefit from this course, inshaAllah. But it's just, for further reference, if you'd like to examine the hadiths, for instance, or the scholarly opinions, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, then you may do so. Some of the important discussions that we had last year about Khums, the categories and the items that Khums is wajib on. We examined the discussion on ma'una, the expenses. What kind of expenses are exempt? What expenses are not exempt? Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. We also examined the discussion of Khums applying to children's money. Do I have to take out the Khums from my children's money? Those who are not baligh or no? We had the discussion on that. The ways that people try to use to evade Khums, we examined them. Are they legitimate? Are they not legitimate? So we had a number of important discussions last year. This year we will continue with another set of important discussions. One important question that many people have about Khums. People say the following: for years I've not paid my Khums. Now what do? I want to pay my Khums now. How do I start? First of all, remember that it is not enough just to ask for forgiveness. Skipping the Khums for years is a sin because it's an obligation by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah commands us in the Holy Quran, and the Ahlul Bayt, peace be upon them, have commanded us in the Hadith to pay Khums. So if I have skipped Khums and I've not been observing this important obligation, that is considered a violation of God's law. It's an act of ibadah that must be observed. So one has to, of course, seek repentance and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for forgiveness. But is that enough? That's not enough. In order to demonstrate that this repentance is sincere, one has to give what they owe. One has to give what they're liable to giving. So you have to go back and do your best to figure out what is it that you owed in Khums. So here's an example. Let's say you go back to 2010, you have your financial report. A lot of people keep that. They know exactly how much they made, what their expenses were. So you see that in the year 2010, you made $50,000. You spent $45,000. At the end of the year, you were left with $5,000. That's the surplus income on which Khums is applicable. So you had to pay 20% of that, which is $1,000. You are liable to give that. This is an obligation in our school of thought. So if you know the amount, you have to try to figure it out, go back to your records and pay that. Now the reason why you have to pay that, because some people say, okay, the past is the past. Let me start giving Khums from now. The reason why you have to give that is because 20% of that income technically did not belong to you. It belonged to the recipients of Khums, the categories that we will be discussing in the near future, inshallah. The poor and the other recipients. They are actually a partner with you in what you own. So 20% of that money was not yours. So you are liable to now give it. This is the first scenario, if you can figure out what that amount was. What about the second scenario? If someone says, I don't know, I have no clue, how do I know how much money I had at the end of the year? So scholars have said two fundamental points here. First of all, try to come up with an estimate that you are certain of. So look back at the year 2010. You know for a fact you had at least $3,000 at the end of the year. That you're certain of. We call this in Islamic law al-qadar al-mutayaqqan. That which you're certain of. Definitely 3,000 I did have. Now did I have 4,000? Did I have 5,000? I really don't know. Come up with an estimate that you're certain of. Because you're certain of that estimate, you are liable to pay the khums on it, 20% of that $3,000. So when you come up with an estimate, you don't take the highest value, take the lowest value. It's just like missed prayers, right? We talked about that in the book of Salah. You don't know how many years of missed prayers you have. Is it 3 years? Is it 4 years? Is it 5 years? What do scholars state? Take the lowest estimate. You're liable for making up 3 years. Anything over 3 years is recommended for you to make up if you'd like to, but you're not required by Islamic law to observe the highest estimate. You can go with the lowest estimate. Same with khums. You can go with the lowest estimate. Yes, brother.
What was the term called?
Al-qadar al-mutayaqqan. Al-qadar means the amount. Assalamu alaikum. Al-mutayaqqan means what? That which you're certain of. Question. Let's now use a principle from legal theory, from usul. Why is it that scholars have mentioned you can go by the lowest amount? Because one could make the argument that you have to go with the highest amount to make sure you free yourself from this obligation, right? You know for a fact you have to pay khums. Pay the higher amount to make sure that I am free from this obligation. Someone could make this argument. Why do scholars state you can go with the lowest amount? If you remember the law of bara'ah, asl al-bara'ah, the law of exemption, it's applied here. The law of exemption says anything you do not know to be an obligation on you, the hadith says it's lifted from you. It's called the law of exemption. You're exempt from it. Let me give you a very common example. Let's say you know you owe Ali an amount of money. You have to give him back. You're indebted to him, right? You don't know, is it $10 or $20? I know for a fact I have to give him back that amount of money. I owe him an amount of money. Is it $10 or $20? I don't know. The $10 I am certain of, that's called the qadar al-mutayaqqan. Anything over $10, is it certain or is it doubtful? It's mashkuk, it's doubtful. The law of exemption says anything that's doubtful as an obligation, it's lifted from you. So the law of exemption is what allows us to rely on al-qadar al-mutayaqqan. Otherwise, the intellectual law of precaution would tell you you have to pay him $20 because you know for a fact you owe him some money, right? So you have to free yourself from that obligation. How can you free yourself from that obligation? Only if you give him $20, you're certain, that's it. I'm not liable anymore. Initially, that's the intellectual law, but the hadith makes it easier for us. The hadith from the Prophet ﷺ, which is hadith al-raf', it's the hadith which is the basis for the law of exemption. It says anything you're unsure of, it's lifted from you. So the same applies here. You can go with the lower estimate of khums and pay that. However, some maraja have an addition here. They're like, that's not really enough. You have to do something more than that. What is it? They're like, look, since 2010, if you owed this khums and you did not give it to its recipients, so for 9 years you've been withholding the rights of those individuals. And that's an act of injustice. Assalamu alaikum. That's an act of injustice, right? Because you violated their rights and you delayed their share, you're not off the hook by just taking the lowest estimate. Now you have to do what is called a musalaha with the marji' or his representative, because they represent the poor and those recipients of khums. Basically, you have to do a negotiation with your marji'. Your marji' will tell you, for 9 years, you denied the recipients of khums their share. Well, that's an act of injustice. Now, I represent the recipients. So on their behalf, I'm going to negotiate with you. So some maraja' like Ayatollah Sistani, this is how he's negotiated it. He says, go with the lowest estimate, which is, let's say, $1,000. You're sure of that, 1,000. What about the higher estimate, like $2,000? What is the probability of you owing more than 1,000? What is that probability? So you could say the probability of me owing $2,000 is 50%. Ayatollah Sistani says, this is how I negotiate with you. 50% probability, pay 50% of that higher amount. So in our example, you don't know, do I have to pay 1,000 or 2,000? I really don't know. First step, the 1,000, are you sure of? Definitely you have to pay that. The other 1,000, which is doubtful, you don't know. Maybe you owe it, maybe you don't. The marja' is going to ask you, what is the probability of you owing that additional amount? Is it 25%? Give 25% of it, $250. Is it 50%? Give 50% of it. Is it 80% probability? Give 80%. That's how I negotiate with you on behalf of the poor, and I relieve you from any obligation that's on you. This is how some maraja' have addressed this issue. Now, why do we have to do this? Ihtiyat wujubi, obligatory precaution, according to these maraja'. They're like, for 9 years, you denied them their right. So now I have to advocate on their behalf. I can't let you off the hook that easily. That's kind of like the idea there. Yes, brother.
So the example you used was if you were to owe another 1,000, you said if you have a 50% possibility of owing that.
So the first 1,000 you're sure of, you pay it. The other 1,000, there's a 50% chance that you might have to owe it because you don't have exact records of how much money you made. So you're like, you know what, maybe I have to pay more khums, maybe. So the marja' is going to ask you, okay, give me that probability. Is it a 50%, 25%, 80%? Based on that probability, give the khums amount.
But what if he didn't know the second value? So he knows that he owes more, but he doesn't know if it's 1,000 or 2,000.
Well, give me the most reasonable estimate. It's definitely not more than 5, let's say, right? You know it's definitely at least 1,000. Now is it 2, is it 3? I don't know. Is it 5? Is it 10? Is it 50? You have to have some sort of range, right? Because you know how much you make each year and you have an idea of your expenses and expenditures. So come up with a rough idea. You're like, look, it's somewhere between 1 and 5,000. I really don't know. It's definitely not more than 5,000. It's very unlikely. So the marja' will say, okay, from 1 to 5,000, that's $4,000. What is the probability of you owing this $4,000? Is it a 20% chance, 30% chance? Pay 20% of it as khums, and that's how you negotiate with the representative of the poor, who is the marja'. So that's one way the maraja' have suggested this could be examined. Yes, brother.
Is it 20% of the percentage that you know, or like if the probability is 30%?
If the probability is 30%, you give 30% of that amount, which you think you have to pay as khums. So I don't know, do I have to pay $1,000 as khums or $2,000? The 1,000 is guaranteed, you pay it. The next 1,000, the likelihood of me owing that is 30%. So you give 30% of that 1,000, which is $300 as khums. Yes. So it's just a straightforward percentage. So this is the scenario for someone who has not paid their khums for years, and now they want to estimate, how much they need to pay. Any questions on that? This is a very important point, by the way. It could apply to many, many people. That's the first discussion in our class tonight. The second discussion, very briefly, stock markets. If you own stock, do you have to pay khums on that? It's not actually cash in your hand. It's not property in your hand. Do you have to pay khums on it? January 1, 2019, you bought $20,000 worth of stock. January 1, 2020 comes, that stock is now worth $30,000. It's still there, you own it, you never spent it, you never sold the stock and spent it on yourself. It's still there, you own those shares. Do you have to pay khums on that? Okay, so the brother says yes. Why? According to Islamic law, why do you have to pay khums on it?
Because you gain money through that year.
It goes back to the verse of the Quran and the hadith of Ahlul Bayt. The Quran says, وَاعْلَمُوا أَنَّمَا غَنِمْتُمْ. In Surah Al-Anfal says, anything you gain. Question, if you ask the public, me owning stock, is that a gain or no? It's a gain. So the verse of the khums would apply. The hadith also, كُلَّمَا أَفَادَ النَّاسُ مِنْ قَلِيلٍ أَوْ كَثِيرٍ. Anything people benefit and profit. Stocks, are they profits? They are. So the khums would be applicable. That's the proof. Yes, sister.
But you don't get the gain until you sell the stock. So it's an imaginary gain. You don't actually have that money. So how would I pay khums on money I don't actually have? So do you have to sell it in that case?
That's a good question. So I don't actually have cash money in my hands right now. I own that much stock. It's just the value that I own. So when my khums year comes, what do? There are two solutions for this. One is to estimate the value of khums that you have to give. Let's say you have $10,000 worth of stocks. The khums of that would be $2,000. You give $2,000 right now to the recipients of the khums, and that way the stock that you have is fully owned by you. So even if you don't have the stock right now, you can pay from another source of money. The other method is to wait. Let's say you don't have that cash. That's fine. You are liable for $2,000 worth of stock. Whenever you sell that stock, then you would give it to the poor immediately.
Okay, so if by the next year, so like the stock appreciated $10,000, but by the half of next year when you sell it, it decreased again $5,000. So when you sell it, you only gained a total of $5,000. Would you only pay khums on that $5,000?
The khums that you have to pay does not depend on the day that you're going to sell it. It's the day when your khums year came. Because on that day, you owned that much stock. You could have sold it that day, could you or no? See, sometimes it's an account you don't have access to. Or like a person who's in jail, they can't go and do any business transactions. That's different. The person says, well, on my khums year, I didn't have access to those stocks. But technically, if you wanted to sell those stocks on January 1, could you? Yes, you could have. So one practical solution is on January 1, when your khums year comes, sell 20% of that stock. Get the value, give it as khums. And that way, you save yourselves a lot of headache. But you can wait till you actually sell the stock. But remember, you're going to have to look at the value of the stock on your khums date, not the day that you sell it. So if the stock market crashes and you lose that value, that is a loss. The khums is still applicable to you. The day when your khums year came. So that's another way to kind of handle that.
More questions.
Yes.
What if you put stock in like a 401k or an IRA, so like something you don't have access to them for a certain amount?
So if you have money in a long-term account that you don't have access to now, like a 401k, the way it works is that when you retire, let's say, you get that money. So scholars have mentioned you don't owe any khums now.
Okay.
You can, if you'd like, to pay it from another source. But you're given the option to wait until the day you start receiving money from your 401k. On that day, you would have to pay the khums.
But do you still calculate it every year and put it like write it down till that day, or do you just at the end of the...
Well, basically on the day when that account is released, right? 20% of it is not yours. So every paycheck that you get, 20% of it must go to Khums. That's how it's going to work. See, the day that you start getting the money from the 401k, they don't give you the entire money. They give you $1,000 a month. So every time you receive that $1,000, 200 of it is given to Khums right away. Exactly. Why? Because the actual Khums was applicable when you owned those assets. Like 10 years ago, you really owned this. So now you have to give it. And this was money that you never used for your expenses all those 10 years. It was just money piling up for you, right?
But doesn't apply to your expenses on that year when you receive your...
No, because this is Khums that was in reality liable. You were liable for it in previous years, yes. It's not considered this year's income.
But some of these 401k, it's like a bonus given to you by your company. So you don't actually...
But the bonus is profit. It's ghanima, it's fa'ida.
I say no in some cases.
Well, he says with gift. With gift. Is a bonus a gift? Or it's compensation for your work, really? It's difficult to say it's just a gift. A gift is you go and visit someone, you give them a gift, right? So with a bonus, it's basically paying you back for your services. Yes, to appreciate your services, you're given a bonus. It's an incentive. But is it a gift? If we assume society considers it purely as a gift, then yes. The marji' who says no khums applies to the gift, that's fine. According to his fatwa, you wouldn't have to pay khums on it. But I don't know. My impression is that it's not really a gift.
The way the company looks at it, it's an employee benefit plan. So they don't treat it as gift. If you want to look at the US laws, it's not treated as a gift.
It's not treated as a gift.
If it's treated as a gift, they're limited to $25 a gift.
So on your tax papers, do you pay tax on that bonus or no?
No, they don't, because on a 401k, but the company gets a deduction. It's an employee benefit plan.
No, the question is, if this year my company gave me $20,000 bonus, do I have to report that in my tax?
If you're 401k, no. If it's on your check, yes. Yeah. If it's a bonus on your check, yes.
Okay.
But if it's directly to your 401k, it's not.
So the idea here that it's not just a gift then. And the proof is if they give it to you now, you have to put it on your tax papers. Whereas normal gifts, you don't have to put on your tax papers. In any case, this is the law. If society considers it just a gift, purely a gift, then according to some maraja who say the khums does not apply to the gift, you wouldn't have to pay the khums on it. But for those maraja who do say that khums is applicable on gifts, or we say, you know what, this is not really a gift, it's more of some sort of financial compensation for your work, then the khums would apply. So every month that you get that 401k, you would have to pay 20% of it to the poor. Because you owned this money really 20 years ago, it was just waiting for you in an account. And you never used it for your expenses in that year. So now 20% of it has to go to the recipients of khums. Yes?
Maybe I missed the previous couple classes, but the 401k as itself, is it okay we can invest in it or no?
Yes, we can invest in it.
So if
Absolutely.
There's gains, we don't question the gains. We just...
Yes, we can invest in it. Now there is one important clause with stocks. When you invest in stocks, I know this gets very complicated and complex of the way the stock market works. But scholars have mentioned that any company that deals with alcohol, right? Like Budweiser, let's say, or financial institutions that are based on the interest system, right? They offer interest-based transactions. The vast majority of scholars in Maraja say it would be haram to invest in these institutions because now you're basically involved in the business of selling alcohol.
But there's most people, they don't look at I'm not speaking on them, but many, they don't look at where their money goes in their 401k.
They don't see where their money goes, right?
So is it obligatory for them to look at where the money's coming from, or you could just...
If there is a high likelihood that it will end up, in a company like Budweiser that sells alcohol, then yes, they should look into it. If it's, not such a big likelihood, they don't have to investigate. But if they do know, if it was brought to their attention, they have to avoid it. So invest in stocks that don't deal with these haram categories. That's one stipulation scholars have mentioned. Okay, so this is the second part of our discussion. The third part of our discussion, which is an extremely important one. If someone dies, a father, a mother, a husband, a wife, a family member, they die and they leave inheritance. And you are one of the inheritors. You inherit your father, your mother, your sibling. If you inherit them, and that inheritance comes to you, and you know that the deceased, the father in this example, did not pay khums, do you have to pay khums on the inheritance that you receive before the inheritance becomes lawful to you, or no?
No, he has to pay his, you have to pay his khums.
Right. So the khums that he owed, do you have to give it to the recipients, and what remains, you take it as inheritance? Or you're like, I don't care, that was his problem. I want my share of the inheritance. Yes.
He has to pay it. You can't pay khums behalf of somebody else.
Okay, so let's examine this discussion here. Scholars are actually divided on this issue. A number of scholars, they said that person owed khums, and that's a dain. Khums is a dain. What does dain mean? It's a debt. And the verse of the Holy Quran is very clear. When do you divide the inheritance and give it to the inheritors? من بعد وصية يوصي بها أو دين. Right? If your father was indebted to Zayd $10,000 and he never paid it back, now he dies, he's left $20,000. $10,000 is not his. You have to give it back to Zayd. So you have to give that to Zayd. What remains, you give it to the waratha. You give it to the inheritors, right? Same with khums. 20% of his money was not owned by him. His surplus money, not his actual income, right? He had partners with him who are the recipients of khums. So he is indebted to them. So you have to put that on the side, then take the inheritance, right? So most scholars have actually said that. If you do know that the deceased did not pay their khums, and you can try to figure out a way to estimate what their khums was, you do have to. Let's say I don't know. Do you have to investigate? You don't have to investigate. If he did not mention it in his wasiyah, in his will, he did not mention it to someone, he did not appoint someone to execute his will and financial things, you don't know, you don't have to investigate. And in fact, you can assume that any Muslim is fulfilling their obligations. But let's say you do know. You know for a fact that your father did not pay his khums, and you have an idea or you have a way of finding out roughly how much. You do have to. You are required by law, by Islamic law, to put that on the side. Now, any questions on that? Yes. Okay, let's say you want to pay that khums, but your siblings, they refuse. Well, you don't have control over them. From your share, from the share that you get, give the khums. Okay, so let's say you only received land, not money. 20% of that land, or how much ever the khums was, you would have to give it to the poor later. Because now the poor, see the land that you received, 80% of it was not owned by him to begin with. 20% of that land belonged to the poor. So when you sell that land, for instance, you would have to give it as khums, 20% of it. So if others are not observing the khums in their share, you have to observe it in your share. Yes?
Is it duty for the oldest son to make it up, like prayers and...
No, it's not the duty of the eldest son to pay from his own money, no. That's not one of the obligations. It's not like prayer, where he has to make up the missed prayers. So this is the fatwa of the Maraja. However, some Maraja have said something interesting. They're like, that deceased, was he an observing person who normally would pay his khums, he believed in khums. Now the last few years he started to kind of fall behind on his khums, right? In that case, you have to take out the khums and give it to free his obligation. But if your father did not believe in khums at all, he didn't believe in khums. In fact, let's say he comes from another school of thought. Let's say you're Shia, he was Sunni. So either he doesn't believe in khums because he comes from a different school of thought, or he was a Shia, but he just rejected the idea of khums and never paid khums in his life. Some maraja', they say, in that case, you don't have to pay the khums. Take all the inheritance, it's halal for you. Why? They cite two hadiths from Al-Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salam. This is a hadith that we're going to examine in detail when we talk about tahleel al-khums. Have you heard of the idea that the Imams declared khums to be halal for all the Shia and they're free in the time of ghaibah, right? We're going to discuss that in detail. We do have hadiths that say at the time of ghaibah, the Shia don't have to pay khums. There's a big controversy around this issue. We'll examine that in detail in a few classes. But very briefly, a man comes to Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, and basically he says, I engage in business with people. I buy, I sell, I inherit, and I know those people don't pay their khums. So what do I do now? I buy a house and I know the owner of the house never paid his khums. So 20% of that house did not belong to him. Am I stuck with this liability now? The Imam alayhi salam tells him, Ma ansafnakum in kallafnakum dhalika al-yawm. The Imam says, it wouldn't be fair to our Shia if we put them in that position. Because now out of all people, everything you buy and sell, 20% of it is not mine, 20% of it is not mine. You buy a house, and then you're told, hey, 20% of it is not yours, give it to the poor. You buy a car, 20% of it is not for you. The Imam alayhi salam says this is an excessive burden on the Shia. Because others don't observe khums. Non-Muslims don't observe the khums. The Sunnis don't observe the khums. So the Imam said, I make an exception. Technically, yes. 20% of that has to go to the recipients of the khums. Half of it to the Imams, and the other half to the recipients that we're going to talk about. But the Imam says, I've relieved you from this obligation. So if you buy a house and you know the owner of that house never paid his khums, that's fine. The house is halal for you. You don't have to pay any khums on it. So the tone of the hadith is what? There are people who don't believe in khums. It's not in their school of thought. It's not in their religion. And you constantly deal with them. The Imam alayhi salam says, you're relieved from paying the khums. Question. A Shia father who dies, who has not paid his khums, do these hadiths apply to him or no? The Maraja have said if he was an observant Shia who believed in the concept of khums, but he was just sinful, these hadiths don't apply to him. Because he knew that this was an obligation. He was just negligent with it. So you have to free him from that obligation by giving the khums, then receiving the inheritance. But if that father, let's say, was from a Sunni school of thought, he did not even believe in khums, the hadith clearly would apply to him. So this is why some maraja' have made the stipulation. If this deceased was a person who did not really believe in khums, never paid khums in his life, in that case, you can take the inheritance and you don't have to free him from his obligation, because he did not even believe in that obligation to begin with. But if he did believe in this obligation, he was a little bit negligent with it, you would have to free his obligation. So that's the fatwa of the maraja'. Yes, brother.
So, if he's a Shia and rejected the idea of khums, should he still be freed from the obligation?
So if he was a Shia, according to these scholars, and he completely rejected the idea of khums, like some people say, right? It's a fabrication, who made this up? I don't believe in it at all, and they never paid khums in their life. According to these maraja', they say, in that case, you as the waratha, as the inheritor, you don't have to put their khums on the side. Just take everything from them as your inheritance. Now, a very quick question here. You could argue, wait a minute, Islam is being lenient with the one who's not fulfilling this obligation, and Islam is being hard on the one who believes in khums. It's the other way around. See, if that person believed in khums, now they were a little bit negligent. Allah wants them to be free from that obligation. Because remember, in the barzakh, Allah will ask us. There was money that you had to pay. So Allah commands the inheritors, free your father from that obligation. He believed in khums. Okay, now he was a little bit negligent. Help him out. Save him after his death. But if the person never even believed in that obligation, what do you want to save him for when he never even believed in it to begin with? It's as if Allah does not give him that, privilege. So when the inheritors free their deceased from this obligation, it's actually a privilege to those inheritors. Not the inheritors, the deceased. Those who leave inheritance.
I have a question.
Yes.
What if the deceased dies? Does he have any anything for his kids to inherit? But
Doesn't leave any assets behind.
No assets. But the problem with it, he never paid Khums. Like he believed in it, but never did pay. And what happens?
So if the deceased dies, he doesn't leave any assets behind. He owed Khums in his life, he never paid it. He did believe in it. If the children would like to free him from his obligation, so Allah forgives him, it is encouraged that they pay Khums on his behalf. But they're not obligated. They can just come up with a rough estimate. For example, the son says, here's $10,000, Ya Allah, I don't know how much my father owed Khums, but I want to pay this and I ask you to relieve him from this obligation. He doesn't have to, he's not required by Islamic law to do that. But out of his own goodwill, if he does that, that's the greatest service he can do to his father. In fact, we have hadiths that say there are children who are dutiful towards their parents. But on the Day of Judgment, Allah will resurrect them undutiful. Aq. They will say, Ya Allah, I was good to my parents. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will tell this person, when they passed away, you forgot about them. Not a good deed, not a prayer, not charity, not trying to relieve them from their obligations. You forgot about them. And your parents needed you more after their death than when they were alive. So out of goodwill you can, but you're not obligated. It's not an Islamic obligation. What time is Salah tonight?
Well, 7:45.
Okay, so we have a few more minutes. So this is discussion on someone who passes away, and you do know, you have certainty that they did not pay their khums. You have to pay that amount if you know the amount. That's why it's recommended, my dear brothers and sisters, to write your will. In your will, if you have these missed obligations, write them. That way you don't confuse the inheritors. They don't know what's going on. And that way, when it's in your will, at least this is one way to guarantee that you will be freed from this obligation. Because we have very, very strict hadiths that every single dirham, every single dollar, Allah will hold us accountable for. So it's highly recommended to write this in your will. Yes.
If someone never paid Khums and they never cared about it, and they were really good and good person, did a lot of good deeds and everything, will God take them to hell for that, or will He burn them?
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is merciful. If a person never paid khums in their life, not out of stubbornness, not out of rejection. There are some people, they know what their obligation is, but they don't care. They don't care about God's law. They are told, they dismiss it, right? So they have this intent of not obeying God. We cannot we still cannot say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to take them to hell, because Allah reserves the right to forgive whomever He wishes, but it's tougher for them. Yes, because they were stubborn with God's law. But let's say you had a decent, very good person who really did not know that this was an important obligation. They didn't know any better. Never crossed their mind, or they grew up in a family environment where this was not even mentioned or raised. They did not know the significance of it. Yes, of course, there is a lot of room for forgiveness. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, those who are stubborn with Him, He punishes them. And Imam Ali alayhi salam refers to this in Dua Kumain, وَأَن تُخَلِّدَ فِيهَا الْمُعَانِدِينَ. In fact, the hadith says there are mu'anid, stubborn people, even on the Day of Judgment, when they see the truth, they still defy Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yes, believe me, there are people like that. We see it here in this world with some criminals, even when they're put on trial, like Saddam when he was put on trial, till the last minute he denied that he did anything wrong. And the judge would tell him, all these thousands that you slaughtered, he's like, yeah, they deserved it. See? Even when everything, on the Day of Judgment, believe me, he's going to say the same thing. He still won't genuinely admit that he did wrong. Okay, what do you do with people like that? Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib says, it's these mu'anideen that are going to get the eternal punishment in hell. Otherwise, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive a person whose intentions were good. They didn't know any better. They're still at fault for not learning and knowing, but Allah forgives. Okay, now another discussion here that some scholars have mentioned. If you know someone died and they did not pay their khums, and let's say they had the habit of not paying the khums. It's not that they did not believe in it, but consistently throughout their life they did not pay khums. Some scholars like Ayatollah Khoi, their fatwa is the balighs, the elders, the inheritors, the waratha, those who are baligh, they have to put the khums aside. But the younger ones who are not baligh, you give them the full inheritance. So he's made a distinction between the baligh and those who are younger. Some maraji' have said that, maybe the mainstream have not said that. One other discussion here about inheritance. Life insurance. If someone dies and their family gets life insurance, do they have to pay khums on that life insurance or no? Well, it depends on whether we consider this irth, inheritance or not. Because if you remember from last year, if you receive irth, inheritance, do you have to pay khums on it? No? Khums does not apply to inheritance. So if you got $10,000 from your father, and it stays for 10 years with you and you don't touch it, you don't pay any khums on it. Because it's one of those categories which are khums exempt. We have a hadith about that. You inherited a house from your father, right? You never lived in that house. It's not your expense. In fact, it's an investment house. Yes, the rent that you collect will fall under the category of khums if it stays at the end of the year. But the house itself is khums exempt for life because that's inheritance that you received. Khums does not apply to inheritance. Life insurance, is that inheritance or no? What do you say? What do you say?
I would say it depends on the year. Let's say you take, it's $100,000 life insurance.
So now the family receives it upon the death of that deceased, right?
If it's part of the year and they still have the money at the end of the year, then you pay 100%.
Well, before that,
I'm not sure.
the day they receive it, the person dies, right? The father dies, his family goes next day to collect the life insurance. The day they collect the life insurance, is that inheritance?
No.
A lot of scholars say no. Why? They're like, that money from the life insurance company is not money that your dad owned in his life and now he's passing it to you. It's just compensation that a company is giving you upon the death of your father. Your father never owned it. It was never his money. It's your money, but the timing of it is the death of that person. So a lot of scholars don't consider this as irth. They're like, this is just like a gift that you get. Life insurance basically is a gift that's due upon the death of a person. That's the reality of it, isn't it? Did he own it in his life?
He was paying to own that after his death.
He never owned it. When did he own it?
It's like stocks.
Could he take that money and spend it on himself?
No.
So he never owned it.
If it helps, it's not considered.
See, that's the question in Islamic law. The marja is going to ask the following question. The guy who was paying monthly to get that life insurance for his family. Question. Did he own that money?
No.
If he owned it, fine. It's inheritance. He left it behind for his family. But the argument that the scholars are making, like our understanding of most types of life insurance, now even life insurance, you have thousands of types, it can get complicated. But most types, the person, the deceased, never really owned that money. He was paying it so his family would own it in the future, but he never really owned it. So when he dies, they get that money. It's just like a gift that you get, right? If the year passes and you did not spend it, you would have to pay khums on it. Yes, if they spent it in that year, let's say as soon as they got the life insurance money, they all spent it for their expenditures. They bought a house, they bought a car, whatever, no khums. But we're saying if it stayed till the end of the year, that's the difference. If we consider it inheritance, no khums would apply, even if it stays till the end of the year.
There's some life insurance that
Is it a gift?
You just mentioned gift.
Is it a gift? Life insurance, is that a gift?
Yeah.
What is it?
What else you want to say? Compensation on what?
If society considers it a gift, then the marji' who says that no khums is applicable on the gift, yes, we can say that it doesn't apply.
Well, I guess, because he's paying some money to get.
but he never
Right.
owned it.
See, it's not money that he owned.
But there's
It's not really a gift.
That's a type of business. You're buying that type of business so your family can benefit later. But it's a business.
But you never owned it legally.
That's fine.
And the proof is you could never use that money. Can you go to the life insurance company and say, hey, give me that money?
But your family can use it. It's
They can't.
Future business.
You can pull out your contributions. So that was my question. is the
You
one-
can't pull it out?
You can pull out your.
So if I've given them $10,000 the past few years,
That 10,000.
I can pull it
It's
out.
not
You
cash
can pull out the
value.
extra.
It has cash value?
No, majority are term life, they don't. But some of them, they have cash value. So let's say he has $1 million policy, but after 20 years, he has $500,000 in cash value, which he can take, because he's been putting,
Okay.
let's say 20,000, 30,000, 40,000, we're not gonna go that complicated.
So then it depends on the type of contract that you have.
But when he passes away, they still get the million plus the some of them, I think, they get the million plus the 500. So I
They
think
still get that
They
too.
still, but the 500, I think, is the inheritance, the cash value.
So we have to investigate whether the person owned it or not. It makes a big difference. You know why? If you say the person never owned it in his life, that money is free money for you. If the guy had debts, he had khums, I don't care. That's money that I got right now as a gift. See, even if you know your father had khums that he had to pay, the money you get from the life insurance is completely yours. It has nothing to do with his finances. But if we assume in his lifetime he owned it, then we have to include it with his other assets and divide it accordingly. See, it makes a big difference whether we consider inheritance or not. Big difference. Let's say your father died with debts. In fact, he died with zero money in his account and he was indebted. If that money, the life insurance, was his in his lifetime, he owned it, you don't get anything from it. You have to give it to those whom he was indebted to because it was his money. So it has to go towards his debts. But if you consider it as money that was given to you and it was never owned by him, it's not inheritance, that money is yours. You don't have to use this money to fulfill his debts. So it makes a big difference whether we consider it his money in his lifetime and he leaves behind as inheritance, or it's just, another transaction that they're benefiting from. So it's important to kind of ask and see what's going on with these life insurance. Yes, sister.
My question is, the money I contribute to my own life insurance for when I pass away, does that go out of my expenses for the year?
Yes, it goes out of your expenses. So the money, let's say you're paying $500 a year for that life insurance. That is an expense. Because in today's society, that is considered an expense. You paid that money. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين. اللهم صل على محمد.